After 13 years and nearly $1 billion, Star Citizen might actually become a real game in 2026. But that's not the interesting part. What's interesting is that Cloud Imperium stopped promising revolutionary features entirely. They spent 2025 doing something no one expected, making the stuff that already exists actually work. Squadron 42 hit a major milestone where all chapters are fully playable from beginning to end. Static server meshing went live in January 2025 with patch 4.0.1 and ran in controlled tests without exploding. The Pyro system launched, and people played in it for hours without the servers catching fire. These aren't exciting bullet points for a marketing presentation, which is exactly why they matter. You've probably heard versions of "this is the year" before. Everyone has. The difference this time isn't hype or promises. It's that the studio changed what they're optimizing for. CIG called 2025 the year of playability, focusing on improving stability and quality of life. Instead of adding salvage gameplay before servers could stay online for an hour, instead of implementing medical mechanics while basic trading randomly deleted cargo, they spent 12 months on something that sounds boring but isn't. Stability. Polish. Making the foundation actually solid instead of building another floor on a structure that's actively sinking. In 2025, Star Citizen delivered 11 major patches, more than 40 live publishes, 147 PTU builds, and several tech previews. And the weird thing? It worked. Player counts hit records. People logged multi-hour sessions. The persistent universe started feeling less like a tech demo you tolerate and more like a game you choose to play. The question isn't whether Star Citizen will be finished in 2026. It won't be. Star Citizen 1.0 is realistically 2029 or later, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. CIG reaffirmed Squadron 42's 2026 release window. The actual question is whether 2026 represents the inflection point where this stops being an interesting experiment you check on occasionally and becomes something you actually play. Not because it's perfect. It won't be perfect. Because it's functional enough that the emergent moments outweigh the frustration of the bugs. That calculation has been underwater for a decade. It might finally flip positive. Think about what year of playability actually meant as a development philosophy. For years, the approach was additive. More systems, more features, more mechanics, layered on top of other mechanics that didn't quite work yet. You got salvage before servers were stable. Medical gameplay before basic mission systems functioned reliably. Ship interiors with physicalized components, while desync made combat feel like gambling. The assumption was that eventually, magically, all these pieces would click together into a coherent whole. That's not how complex systems work. That's not how anything works. 2025 represented a philosophical inversion. Stop adding, start fixing. The Pyro system launched in 1 year, which sounds like expansion, but the technical achievement was that static server meshing could handle the load. Monthly patches replaced quarterly disasters. When engineering gameplay launched too fragile and players lost ships to component damage that felt arbitrary, the studio responded with balance iterations within weeks instead of letting it sit broken for 6 months. That responsiveness matters more than getting it right the first time. Getting it right the first time was never realistic. Responding quickly when it's wrong, that's the behavior pattern that determines whether this project survives contact with reality. Static server meshing went live in January 2025 with patch 4.0.1, and most players didn't understand what changed because the technology is invisible when it works. The Stanton system got divided into predetermined zones. Each zone runs on a dedicated server. Pyro operates the same way, 10 servers per shard, supporting 600 to 800 concurrent players instead of the previous architecture that struggled past a few hundred. The Microtech server handles everything on and around that ice planet. The Crusader server manages that gas giant and its moons. They don't care what's happening on the other side of the system because they're not simulating it. That's the breakthrough, distributing computational load so no single server becomes the bottleneck that tanks everyone's experience. The infrastructure supporting this relies on persistent entity streaming and the replication layer, which sound like technical jargon until you understand what they enable. Every object in the universe persists whether players are present or not. Your ship parked on a moon stays there. Cargo you dropped in space doesn't vanish. Destroyed infrastructure remains destroyed. This happens through the entity graph, a database maintaining the canonical state of everything across all server instances. When you leave an area, those objects don't disappear into abstract storage. They remain simulated, tracked, ready to stream back in when you return or when a mission requires them. The replication layer handles synchronization between servers without requiring each server to directly communicate with every other server about every state change. It acts as centralized truth authority, collecting updates from all servers and intelligently distributing information to servers that need it. This prevents exponential communication overhead that would make multi-server operations computationally impossible. Performance improvements from static meshing came from distributing work across multiple physical machines. Previously, one server handled all physics calculations, NPC pathfinding, entity updates, collision detection for everyone in the system. That single server became a massive bottleneck as player counts increased. Static meshing assigns each server only its geographic region. The Microtech server doesn't care about physics on ArchiCorp. It simulates only its ice world and orbital space, eliminating concerns about distant planets affecting its performance. Server tick rate, the frequency of game state updates, improved from degrading to 10 ticks per second under load to targeting 30 ticks consistently. That doesn't sound dramatic until you realize it translates directly to responsiveness. Actions register faster, other players' movements appear smoother, combat interactions resolve with better accuracy. Throughout 2025, Cloud Imperium collected telemetry data from static meshing to inform dynamic meshing development. They monitored how many ships, NPCs, and resource nodes each server could handle while maintaining performance targets. Engineers tracked which zones experienced consistent player clustering and which remained empty, building heat maps revealing natural movement patterns. They measured synchronization overhead from the replication layer, identifying bottlenecks within the message passing infrastructure. This data-driven approach represents a departure from earlier architecture decisions that often preceded comprehensive testing. If a region experiences predictable population clustering at certain times, dynamic meshing will recognize the pattern and pre-allocate resources before players arrive. If another region stays perpetually underutilized, the system deallocates those resources to environments with greater demand. Squadron 42 is the linchpin. Chris Roberts confirmed in December 2025 that all narrative chapters are fully playable start to finish. Content complete. Beta preparation phase. Those words have been thrown around before, so why believe them now? Because the marketing strategy changed. Roberts specified a relatively short marketing campaign. There's no months-long promotional campaign building hype. No specific release date announced 6 months out. They're planning to drop it with minimal notice when it's actually ready. That strategy reveals they learned from past disasters. Star Marine, the 3.0 delays. Every time they built massive hype around a specific date, they failed to deliver and the backlash was brutal. This quiet approach prioritizes quality over marketing calendar deadlines. The game promises 40 hours of gameplay with Gary Oldman, Gillian Anderson, Henry Cavill, Mark Strong. That's not indie voice acting. That's AAA production budget. If Squadron 42 releases and it's legitimately good, not good for Star Citizen, but actually good as a standalone space combat campaign, it validates the entire project retroactively. All those years, all that money, suddenly they make sense. And that success funds continued persistent universe development. Everything hinges on whether they can ship a finished product that meets the quality bar they've set with their casting and production values. If they can't, the project's credibility collapses. If they can, it changes the entire conversation about what Star Citizen is and whether it's worth paying attention to. Conservative projections put Squadron 42's release in 2026 with no specific month confirmed. But the absence of any announcement contradicting the 2026 target, combined with Roberts' explicit statement about content completion, suggests sufficient internal confidence to maintain public commitment. The potential conflict with Grand Theft Auto 6's November release window might push the Squadron 42 earlier. Launching before, rather than competing directly with that cultural phenomenon, makes strategic sense. Dynamic server meshing represents the evolution beyond static meshing's fixed architecture. Where static meshing assigns a permanent server to each region, regardless of whether 10 players or 500 occupy that space, dynamic meshing spins up additional servers as needed when populations spike and tears down unused servers when populations decline. 300 players converge on Jumptown for an event. The system recognizes the computational load spike and provisions additional servers specifically for that location, then deallocates them after the event concludes. The economic implications are significant. Cloud Imperium operates at a deficit despite bringing in over $926 million in crowdfunding. Dramatically reducing operational expenses by not maintaining perpetually underutilized server capacity could change the project's financial sustainability. The technical challenges inherent in dynamic meshing far exceed static meshing, which is why the evolution measures in years rather than months. Static meshing handles transitions between predetermined server boundaries where architecture is known in advance and can be carefully engineered. Dynamic meshing requires real-time decisions about where to create new server boundaries, how to transfer authority for entities from one server to another during migration, and how to ensure perfect synchronization during server spin-up and spin-down operations. Consider a server managing a planet region becoming overloaded. The system must choose which portions to assign to a newly created server, transfer all relevant entity state for those portions, ensure entities being transitioned, maintain perfect synchronization during handoff, and redirect player connections to to the appropriate server, all while continuing to simulate active gameplay without players experiencing lag spikes or disconnections. One particular challenge involves preventing server subdivision paradox. If a single region becomes so crowded that servers can't allocate enough computational resources, the solution theoretically involves subdividing that region into smaller subregions, each with its own server. But if subdivision boundaries cut through areas where players are densely clustered, the system creates new synchronization challenges. Entities near boundaries require constant coordination between adjacent servers, potentially creating worse synchronization overhead than existed before subdivision. The solution involves sophisticated algorithms understanding not just current population density, but predicting likely future player movement patterns and creating subdivision boundaries that minimize cross-boundary interactions. This requires machine learning systems analyzing historical player behavior data to forecast where players will be and how they'll move, then making proactive infrastructure decisions before congestion occurs. Cloud Imperium has been deliberately cautious about implementing dynamic server meshing on live production, instead using controlled testing environments to validate technology before deploying it to players. CitizenCon 2025 in October showcased demonstrations of dynamic meshing concepts, though these occurred in controlled testing scenarios rather than representing gameplay-ready implementation. The stated approach involves first perfecting static server meshing, extracting every optimization possible from that fixed architecture, then layering dynamic capabilities on top of that proven foundation. This conservative approach contrasts with more aggressive development pace evident in other systems, but reflects server infrastructure's central importance. If dynamic meshing deployment destabilizes the persistent universe, it makes the game unplayable for thousands of concurrent players. The replication layer underwent significant architectural evolution, culminating in Replication Layer 2.0, showcased at CitizenCon 2025 as the backbone enabling dynamic server meshing at scale. Rather than existing solely on back-end infrastructure separate from game servers, Replication Layer 2.0 distributes replication logic across multiple service nodes, allowing the system to scale replication capability independently from core simulation servers. The previous architecture created a bottleneck where all state change information flowed through centralized replication services, limiting how much data could be processed. Replication Layer 2.0 employs message queue architecture and distributed nodes that collectively handle replication workload, scaling horizontally as needed when entity state update traffic increases. When one player shoots another player's shield across different servers, extraordinary coordination must occur. The attacking player's server calculates damage based on that client's precise position, velocity, and weapon characteristics. The defending player's server receives information about incoming damage from the replication layer, calculates shield absorption and remaining integrity, determines whether components behind the shield are damaged, updates visual effects accordingly, and communicates this back through the replication layer. Both clients must receive the authoritative result from the defending server's simulation, and both must render that result consistently. All of this must happen within approximately 100 to 200 milliseconds to feel responsive. Delays longer than this create perceptible lag sensation that degrades gameplay quality. The replication layer must process both servers' state information, determine which server bears authority for the shield calculation, and route information to ensure consistent game state everywhere. At scale with hundreds of servers and thousands of players, this becomes a data processing challenge that requires architectural elegance to solve. Genesis Planet technology reaching version 5 enables procedurally generated planetary environments with dramatically improved visual quality, denser biome systems, and more nuanced environmental storytelling. Previous Genesis iterations produced visually adequate but somewhat generic planetary environments. Version 5 represents a generational improvement, enabling varied biome types, tundra, desert, toxic alien environments, each exhibiting distinctive visual characteristics, environmental hazards, and discoverable points of interest. The technology incorporates advanced EI population management systems that populate biomes with contextually appropriate NPCs and creatures, transitions between distinct environmental zones, and supports large-scale cooperative gameplay objectives requiring organized group effort. The integration of procedural generation enables universe expansion at previously impossible scale. Rather than requiring exhaustive manual design of each planetary location, Genesis technology permits developers to establish biome parameters and environmental characteristics, allowing the system to generate vast arrays of explorable terrain while maintaining human-directed narrative significance at at key locations. This hybrid approach balances the immersive promise of unlimited exploration against the practical reality that manual design of hundreds of planetary locations exceeds realistic development capacity. The Nix system, arriving in 2026, serves as the primary showcase for Genesis technology. The 2026 expansion roadmap includes gradual development of the Nix system, preliminary work on the Castra and Terra systems, and potential groundwork for the Odin system pending resource availability. These new systems serve distinct strategic and narrative purposes within Star Citizen universe topology. Nix represents contested space, reflecting ongoing human-Vanduul military conflicts, and incorporating industrial gameplay opportunities through mining platforms and military installations. Castra and Terra promise distinct environmental and strategic characteristics, expanding the breadth of available gameplay experiences and regional economic opportunities. This phased universe expansion approach reflects mature development philosophy. Rather than promising immediate access to 100-plus systems, as original marketing suggested, developers now acknowledge that meaningful system development requires careful pacing and quality maintenance. Engineering gameplay represents one of 2025's most controversial implementations, intended to add strategic depth to ship combat by introducing critical component vulnerabilities and requiring active management of vessel systems during combat. The system permits targeted destruction of ship components, reactors, power plants, shield generators, weapon systems, each offering distinct tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. The initial implementation proved significantly more fragile than intended. Some player vessels achieved disabled status too rapidly, while others demonstrated excessive durability, creating balance inconsistencies that frustrated both combat-focused and trading-focused player-based segments. Cloud Imperium responded to engineering feedback through iterative balance adjustments and clarifications regarding design intent. Developers explicitly stated their intention remains permitting disabled ships more frequently than destroyed vessels, preserving salvage opportunities and permitting disabled pilots to repair systems rather than automatically resulting in total loss. The 2026 roadmap indicates continued refinement of engineering mechanics, with particular attention to reducing fragility perceptions while maintaining tactical depth that distinguishes Star Citizen's combat from simpler space simulation competitors. The crafting system's transition to tech preview represents a watershed moment for establishing Star Citizen as a genuine sandbox economy rather than a transaction-based reward system. Initial crafting implementations focus on personal armor and basic weapons, providing modest baseline functionality while developers gather data regarding system balance and performance under live conditions. The broader vision encompasses comprehensive manufacturing chains requiring coordinated resource extraction, processing, refinement, and assembly by multiple players fulfilling specialized roles. The crafting system's integration with existing gameplay loops creates emergent economic complexity. Mining produces raw materials requiring processing at refineries, generating refined materials suitable for crafting. Crafted items exhibit quality levels dependent upon material quality and crafter skill, establishing player-accessible power progression independent of vendor-provided equipment. This interconnected economy theoretically supports specialized player roles, miners accumulating ores, refiners processing materials, manufacturers crafting equipment, traders distributing finished goods, creating gameplay depth where current iterations concentrate functionality onto individual players. The successful implementation of crafting directly correlates with whether 2026 delivers on the persistent universe's core promise of emergent sandbox gameplay. Recognizing that multiplayer persistence inherently requires robust social infrastructure, Cloud Imperium has prioritized developing social tools, enabling organized player collaboration at scales ranging from small groups to corporation-like organizations comprising hundreds of members. The 2026 roadmap emphasizes improved friends lists with searchable contact information, organizational tools permitting structured hierarchies and permission systems, enhanced voice communication supporting 50-plus participant groups with improved audio fidelity, and player-to-player trading infrastructure enabling direct economic transactions. These social infrastructure improvements directly address one of Star Citizen's persistent accessibility challenges: the difficulty for casual players to organize meaningful multiplayer experiences. While ambitious players have leveraged external Discord servers and organizational websites to coordinate large-scale activities, the in-game interface has lagged significantly behind modern MMO standards. The 2026 social tool enhancements aim to reduce friction, enabling spontaneous multiplayer experiences and lowering organizational overhead, particularly for smaller groups unable to justify external infrastructure investment. Picture running a bunker mission in Pyro, standard clear the facility contract. The ship gets destroyed by NPCs while you're inside, and suddenly you're stranded on a moon with no quantum beacon nearby. In old Star Citizen, that meant respawning and taking the loss. But the new server meshing means persistence actually works, so calling for help in global chat becomes viable. 15 minutes later, a Cutlass Red appears. Medical ship, piloted by someone you've never met. They land, you board, they fly you to the nearest station. No payment requested, just helping another player. That interaction only worked because the server didn't crash, because persistence meant your body stayed in that location, because the medical ship's systems actually functioned. All those back-end systems that sound boring in patch notes enabled that emergent moment. That's what 2026 builds toward, more of those moments, more reliably. When dynamic meshing goes live, probably mid to late 2026, the meta completely changes. Org warfare becomes viable at scale. Trade routes in high-traffic areas become more contested because servers can actually handle the player density. The technical limitations constraining gameplay right now are about to disappear. Massive fleet battles without turning into a slideshow. Crowded landing zones that don't crater frame rates. Actual large-scale territorial warfare. These aren't theoretical possibilities anymore. They're direct consequences of infrastructure that's already working in controlled tests. The Star Citizen community splits between cautious optimism and exhausted skepticism. On Spectrum and Reddit, you see people saying they'll believe it when Squadron 42 actually releases right alongside people sharing clips of genuinely impressive gameplay moments. Both perspectives are valid. The project has burned people before. Star Citizen 1.0 was supposed to be 2014, but there's this linguistic shift happening. The joke used to be, Star Citizen is the best game you'll never play. In 2025, that started shifting to Star Citizen is the best game you occasionally play when the servers cooperate. That matters. Moving from theoretical to actual, from promise to delivery. If you're a new player considering jumping in during 2026, wait for Squadron 42's release. That's your signal. If Squadron 42 launches and reviews are positive, the persistent universe is worth trying because it means Cloud Imperium can actually finish things. If Squadron 42 delays again or launches broken, wait another year. If you're a returning player who backed years ago and haven't touched the game since 2020, download it during a free fly event. They happen quarterly. Test the stability yourself. Experience varies based on hardware and region, but you'll know within a few hours whether current performance meets your standards. For active players, focus on these systems in 2026. Crafting and manufacturing when it leaves tech preview, engineering gameplay after the balance passes, and exploration when new star systems come online. Those are the gameplay loop that will actually be functional and rewarding. Avoid betting heavily on base building or organizational territory control. Those systems are still years away from meaningful implementation. What you're getting in 2026, Squadron 42, probably releasing in Q4, dynamic server meshing going live mid-year, the NEX system showcasing Genesis tech, and crafting moving beyond basic implementation. That's the realistic expectation, not Star Citizen 1.0, not the complete vision. But it might finally be an actual game playable for hours without wanting to uninstall. The question isn't whether it's perfect. The question is whether it's functional enough that emergent moments outweigh frustration from bugs. That calculation has been underwater for a decade. It might finally flip positive. What's the one feature or fix that would make this worth your time? What keeps you checking back despite everything? Drop that in the comments, because the gap between what this project promises and what it delivers is finally narrowing, and understanding where that gap still exists matters more than pretending it doesn't. Star Citizen in 2026. Maybe, possibly, potentially, finally worth playing. The answer depends less on what Cloud Imperium delivers and more on what you're willing to accept as playable. But for the first time in this project's history, that's actually a reasonable question to ask instead of a joke about vaporware.